Hello, Professor. I'm very glad that we can invite you to have an interview. And here are some questions we are interested in. The first one is, when you were pursuing higher education, you got BSc in Delhi University while PhD in Columbia University. How does it feel like to move on in different fields and in different places?
It feels great. Every place is different. Every place has good things about it. You meet different people, you study different things, you learn different things. And so overall, you learn a lot and you grow as a person. From the time that you first enter university, that's in some sense just one part of your education. You learn some things in your classroom, but you learn other things from your friends and from your university environment. Mm-hmm. And I learned a lot. I mean, as an undergraduate, when I did my MBA, when I did my PhD, these are all different places, different things. You're exactly right. And it hopefully all contributes to make me who I am.
Yeah, that's great. So, after that, why did you choose Hong Kong University?
They gave me a job, so that was good. After you finish your PhD, you start looking for an academic job. And so I applied to many places all over the world, in good universities. And I was very lucky that I got an interview offer here, and I came, visited. I liked it a lot. More importantly, they liked me enough to make me an offer. And so I came.
That's cool. A part of that, I also noticed that one of your latest researches is about systematic causes and corrective machinizing about the obesity crisis and the market value. Could you please share with us what inspired you to choose this topic and the process of doing researches?
Sure. That's a good question. The nice thing about research is that you can do research on anything that you find interesting. And sometimes you don't know where the journey will end. You have some idea where the journey will start. And then as you start answering a question, then other questions come up from your answer. And so that it leads you in one particular way. So I always had an interest in studying what consumers believe about normal things around themselves. What do people believe about, the relationship between price and quality? Do you think high price is better quality or not? That's just a belief that some people have and other people don't have. What do you believe about various other things that go on in the world around you? So I was once at a conference where I was sharing some of my research on people's beliefs about self-control. Mm-hmm. Some people tend to believe that people in general have lots of self-control. And other people believe that, no, this is not right. People in general have very little self-control. And we all share, this belief to some extent or the other. There's some sort of a spectrum and a distribution, and this has effects on people's behaviors. So I was sharing that research, and somebody in the audience came to me and said, do you think that people have beliefs about the causes of being overweight and obesity? Mm-hmm. So I said, I'm sure they do, but I don't know what those beliefs are. And he says, well, I think that maybe some people believe that it's due to eating badly or eating too much. And other people believe it's due to not exercising enough. So diet versus exercise, do you think that's reasonable? So I said, I think it's reasonable, but what's more important is, what do the data say? So let's go and ask a bunch of people. So he and I, we started doing together, this research. We started collaborating on it. We started asking people what do they believe about diet and exercise as a factor that affects obesity. And what we found, very interestingly for us, was in many countries around the world where we collected data, people who believe that poor diet leads to obesity actually tend to control their eating, whereas people who believe in exercise don't control their eating so much. And eating is actually the biggest single cause of overweight and obesity. So the people who believe in poor diet are getting it right, and they tend to have less chances of being overweight, tend to have lower BMI. So for us that was an interesting finding, and we got it published in a journal. And when my co-author was presenting it at a conference, somebody was sitting in the audience and he was asking, where do these beliefs come from? And so we did not have a good answer at that time, and so we investigated it. And we realized that very often the food industry tells people that being overweight or obese is caused by lack of exercise, not by eating badly. So they sort of deflect the attention away from their role in it. And for us, that was a pretty major finding. We found many, many different ways in which the food industry's messages are communicating this half-truth, actually. And that became, another paper. And so the research progressed. And when that paper was coming out, I was fortunate to meet somebody who had come to our university as part of, every university has periodic reviews. So, people from other universities, senior people come and they inspect us and they try and talk to people and figure out what are we doing well, what are we not doing well, and they give us feedback. And somebody was coming to our university from the University of Toronto, and he's a fairly senior researcher who I'd read his books and I liked it a lot. So I sent him an email and I asked him whether he would have half an hour to meet with me. So I was very happy. He said yes. And so when I talked to him, I met him, I talked to him about this. And he agreed with everything I said, but then he says, identifying the problem is only part of it. Now you need to figure out what is the solution, right? So if you think the food industry is being responsible for the obesity crisis in this way, why don't you recommend a solution? And so I and my co-authors, we started thinking about this. And so then that led to the next paper, which was our recommendations for how this can be corrected. And so we investigated various different ways in which if you have a market, basically the food industry is a market, right? There are people selling and there are people buying. And we hear a lot about how the market mechanism should work and there should be a free market and things like that. We're not economists, so we have to go back and read some early economics papers about what exactly is a free market and what are the conditions under which a free market is good and so on. And we realized that basically the food market is not a perfectly free market. There are lots of problems with it. And if there are problems in a market, then you need corrective mechanisms. So then we explored what are the different corrective mechanisms, and we came up with some recommendations. So that's the long story behind that. Starting from thinking, why do people think you get overweight, to this major solution of how can we solve the world's obesity problem. It all started from that one question, and I still continue to be interested in this. We have something called Institute for Emerging Market Studies at UST. Just today, there was a guest speaker who I met at a food industry conference, and she's the CEO of a startup called Investing for Better Nutrition. And she came and gave her perspective on the food industry and how it's just crazy that in the world you have more people overweight than starving. And we used to think that being overweight is a problem in the rich countries, but now it's equally a problem in Asia as well. And so how can we improve our food supply system? I think this is a very broad question. It's not just about marketing or about psychology. It's about economics and supply chains and biotechnology and all of these things. It's a very big problem, and I find it fascinating. Plus, we all eat 3 meals every day at least, so it's very relevant for everyone.
Yeah, and this very big project just comes from a small question.
Exactly, from a very small question.
So I also see that you have been also working in a second dedicated event on food information on TEDx Hong Kong Salon Edible Ideas. Could you tell us your personal experience about this event?
Oh, it was a great fun. It was absolutely fantastic. I'm very happy and very lucky that I got invited. TED Talks, we watch them on the computer and they're informative, sometimes they're interesting. It's always like 15 to 20 minutes, very short, and it could be about anything. But this time that organizes event, 8 speakers, all related to food. And I did not know any of the other speakers before I went there. Turns out there were 2 professors. I was one of them. The other one was a professor who is also an expert chef and has judged in cooking competitions. And then we had journalists, even some people whose writings I've read in the newspaper. We had bakers, we had wine experts, so people with all sorts of different angles on the same idea of food. And everybody had a really, really interesting story to tell. It was a great event, and I really enjoyed being there and sharing my little bit.
So you was talking about the food event,
Yeah.
and there were lots of experts in many fields. Yeah.
So you had all these people from all the different fields, and there was, for example, I was one professor. There was another professor who is actually an expert chef, and she has been the judge for cooking competitions. And there were people who were food writers. So actually, I've read some of their pieces in the newspapers. They had different perspectives. We had an expert baker. We had a wine expert. We had somebody who's a traveler. And conducts guided tours and things like that. So everybody had a different angle, different perspective, different stories to tell, and it was a really, really fantastic afternoon. I really enjoyed the experience.
Okay. So why did you go to attend this conference?
Oh, it was a TED Talk. They invited me. I didn't think that you say no to a TED Talk.
Oh.
It's something that, when my mother found out about it, she was so excited. There's very little else that one does that, other people hear about like that. It's a great place to share, meet people and share ideas.
It seems to me that you had a great interest in food. So
Yes.
I don't know what it is to ask about, so can you tell us the reason why you're so into the foods?
Well, of course, I love eating, as you can see. But I'm sure many people love eating as well. But my interest in food as a research topic is relatively recent. By relatively recent, I think maybe 9 years ago, when somebody came up to me at a conference and asked me. I used to study people's beliefs of various different things, and somebody asked me, "Do you think that you can study people's beliefs about the causes of being overweight and obese?" And that's when I got interested into this.
So what's your favorite food?
I have no favorite food. I have many favorite foods.
So do you have anything that you don't like eating?
I don't know. I mean, there were some things I probably wouldn't try to eat, like maybe stinky tofu I would not try to eat. Or, if you walk on the street in Beijing at night, you have those markets with the insects and the scorpions. I would avoid that.
Okay.
But otherwise, I'm not picky. I'm not picky about food. I like to eat everything pretty much.
But talking about stinky tofu, I think you should give it a try.
Maybe I should someday. When the time is right, then I will.
Yeah.
So you have been traveled to mainland China?
I have been to mainland China.
How many places have you been to?
So which city?
With cities, well, Shenzhen, of course. Shanghai, Beijing, Xi'an, then Urumqi, Kashgar, Kashi. So that's, and some other small towns in the Xinjiang area.
So you went out for traveling or for your research?
Oh, not for research.
Okay.
That was for traveling. Although sometimes, Beijing and Shanghai is on work.